7.3, power functions and function operations. All right, so I'm going to give you some functions that you're going to have to be able to do, or some operations to do with these functions. All right, so one of the things we can do with functions is we can add them together, do addition. So we can create a new function, which we're going to call h of x, by adding together f of x plus g of x. So it would look like this for us. If f of x was 2x and g of x was x plus 1, then h of x would be f of x, which is 2x, plus g of x, which is x plus 1. And then you would just simplify that, combine your like terms, and get 3x plus 1. All right, so you can do addition. You can also do subtraction. So we can build a new function h of x by doing f of x minus g of x. Just be careful when you're doing subtraction. So it's going to look like this. F of x is 2x minus g of x, which is x plus 1. Notice now I put parentheses because we got to treat this like subtracting polynomials. Just like we did with subtracting polynomials, we're going to change this to addition, and then we're going to make both of these the opposite. So this becomes negative, that becomes negative. Now we combine like terms. We have 2x and a negative 1x, which gives us x, and we have a negative 1 or minus 1. So h of x would be equal to x minus 1. All right, so we can also do multiplication. So we can create h of x by doing f of x times g of x. So that's going to look like this, 2x times x plus 1. And all we have to do is distribute the 2x. 2x times x gives us 2x squared. And then 2x times 1 gives us 2x. So we get 2x squared plus 2x. All right, and then the last one we can do, well, not the last one, but the last operation that we know of so far, is division. We can create h of x by doing f of x divided by g of x. So we're going to have f of x, which is 2x, divided by g of x, which is x plus 1. And if we could simplify it, we would. But in this case, we can't simplify that. So we're just going to leave it just like that. All right, so some examples with this. We're going to add and subtract two functions. So f of x is 2x to the 1/2 power, and g of x is negative 6x to the 1/2 power. We're going to find the sum of the two functions. So a is the sum. So we're going to do f of x plus g of x. G of x. And f of x is 2x to the 1/2 power plus g of x, which is a negative 6x to the 1/2 power. And since they're both x to the 1/2 powers, we can combine like terms. So combining like terms, we got a positive 2, a negative 6, gives us a negative 4x to the 1/2 power. All right, so our new function would be negative 4x to the 1/2 power. All right, and then b, we are going to do the difference or subtraction. So we're going to do f of x minus g of x. So now we got f of x, which is 2x to the 1/2 power, minus g of x, which is a negative 6x to the 1/2 power, and minus, again, minus negative, we change these both to plus, and we add, so we get 8x to the 1/2 power. All right. Now, this is the thing that might throw some of you, is the domains of the new functions. So there's only two things we cannot do, all right? Only two things we cannot do. And these are the two things that you have to remember that we cannot do. One of these things is we cannot divide by 0. All right? We get no real solution. All right? And then the other thing that we can't do is we can't do square roots of negative numbers. All right? Square roots of negatives. So that would give us not a real solution. Okay? So those are the only two things you have to worry about, is if you have division in it, and make sure you're not dividing by 0, or if you have square roots or even roots. All right, so that one is, again, square roots or even roots. It's going to cause us to have restrictions on the domain. So Now, when you're building functions, you always have to look at your beginning function. So are there any restrictions on 2x to the 1/2 power? Yes, because that x to the 1/2 power means the square root of x. So x can't be anything negative, so x has to be greater than or equal to 0. And for g of x, the same thing. X has to be greater than or equal to 0. So now when you're using those functions, those restrictions on those carry over to the new function. So we get x has to be greater than or equal to 0 for, that would be the restriction for A. All right, the restriction for B, again, we're using F, we're using G, so we get x has to be greater than or equal to 0. The operation didn't cause any further restrictions. The answer doesn't give us any further restrictions. So x has to be greater than or equal to 0 would also be the restriction for that one. All right. So that's something that can be tough to get used to. All right. So now we're going to multiply and divide. So A, we're going to do multiplication. So we're going to do f of x times g of x. So we got f of x, which is 3x, times g of x, which is x to the 1/4 power. So multiply the numbers. 3 times 1 gives us 3, and x times x to the 1/4 power. Remember, we're multiplying, so we add. So we get 1 1/4, which would be 5/4 power. So we get 3x to the 5/4 power. Okay? And B, we're going to divide. So now we have f of x divided by g of x, which would give us 3x divided by x to the 1/4 power. We have a division. So again, division, 3 divided by 1 is 3. X divided by x to the 1/4. Remember, this is x to the first.